comes to business and charitable and civic leadership, the person I'm about to acknowledge is really second to none. He serves as chairman of the board of Channel 11 WTTW, Norm Bobbins. Norm, come on up and introduce our speaker. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you today. It's also a pleasure to be able to introduce to all of you Paula Kerger. When Paula was appointed president and CEO of PBS, public broadcasters across the country breathed a deep sigh of relief, because this was someone who truly understands the challenges we're facing in today's crowded media environment. And I can truly attest to this. We had a long visit today, and I think you're going to be very pleased. She came to PBS after a very successful tenure as Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at New York PBS affiliates WNET and WLIW, where she oversaw the fulfillment of the largest endowment campaign ever undertaken by a public television station. Now, since she arrived at PBS, her commitment to high-quality content, education, diversity, and the use of new technology has resulted in a broad range of award-winning initiatives, including Ken Burns' The War, the launch of such acclaimed children's series as Curious George and Super Why, and innovative partnerships with companies including iTunes, Netflix, and Amazon U-Box to ensure that PBS programming is accessible to a global audience. Since Paula came on board, PBS has garnered 10 news documentary Emmys, 10 daytime Emmys, 9 primetime Emmys, 8 George Foster Peabody Awards, and 1 Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. Now, that isn't all. She is also the president of the PBS Foundation, an independent organization that raises private sector funding for PBS, and a director of the International Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. She's consistently been named to the list of the nation's top women executives in media. So please join me in extending a warm round of applause for our speaker, Paula Kerger.
Thank you, Norm, for that wonderful introduction. Yeah, that step's a killer. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here in Chicago today, and it's a particular pleasure to be here at the City Club, because I think this organization and the organization that I'm privileged to lead, PBS, has a great deal in common. For one thing, we both cherish civil discourse and debate. I was just looking at the list of topics and speakers that you have coming up, and before I came, I looked online and saw who was here before me. A little nervous that Jim Lair was here before me, so the bar's pretty high. But I see so many of the same themes that we deal with in public television, obviously the presidential campaign, the credit crisis, climate change, and we're looking at these issues both on our airwaves and on the web. I think also, like PBS, you clearly are so heavily involved in promoting citizenship and public service and volunteerism, the values that have truly sustained our democracy for the last 2 centuries. So these are the themes that I decided I would address today, rather than talk about Curious George. But if you have any questions about him, I'll be happy to answer them at the Q&A time. I thought what we would do today is I would try to cover a few issues, but particularly the role that media plays in promoting citizenship, as well as the role that young people are now playing in shaping our nation's future. I also want to talk to you a little bit about PBS and how we're using television and the internet and other new media to help our nation regain the unity that has seemed to be so elusive in recent years. And I thought I'd conclude with some thoughts on technology's potential to help keep our citizenry engaged beyond the election And as I said, I'll leave plenty of time for questions because I think that might be the most interesting part of our time together today. So let me begin by noting the critical connection that media and democracy has shared since our country's earliest days. The Founding Fathers guaranteed freedom of the press in the Bill of Rights because they understood that a well-informed citizenry would be the key to success of self-government. Perhaps Thomas Jefferson put it best when he said, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I should not hesitate a moment to say that I prefer the latter." As Americans' free and independent press took root, it helped foster a marketplace of ideas. Books and newspapers and journals and magazines and radio have played an indispensable role in shaping our nation. But when it comes to sheer power and influence, nothing has compared with television, with its unique ability to engage us with sound and image. So for more than half a century, the box in the living room has served as our electronic hearth. It's given us a place to congregate together during moments of triumph, such as moon landings and Super Bowl victories and Olympic competitions, and also during tragedy, assassinations, shuttle disasters, and of course, terrorist attacks. Beyond these big events, television has helped to cultivate the common values for our country sort of day-to-day, week-to-week, and year-to-year. In the 60s, it was sustained TV coverage of the civil rights movement that really helped humanize that experience for so many Americans and I believe turn the tide of public opinion. During the same turbulent decade, the nightly news brought Vietnam into our living rooms, forcing many Americans to consider what was going on. In fact, in 1968, when Walter Cronkite told the country he didn't believe the United States could win in Vietnam, Lyndon Johnson famously lamented to an aide, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost America." In a nation as large and as diverse as ours, television has allowed us to share common experiences, form common beliefs, and find common ground. But in this century, commercial television, and to some degree, I think commercial news media in particular as a whole, is failing us. And I think we see it very clearly in this election. Barriers are breaking, glass ceilings are cracking, and voter registration is soaring, and yet commercial television is preoccupied with the insignificant, I should say. And the cause for decline in serious journalism, I think, are legion. But in the end, I think it boils down to one principal thing, and that's money. Commercial media can no longer reconcile its journalistic obligations with its need to turn a profit. Now, it hasn't always been this way. In the Cronkite era, the broadcast networks created the public airwaves as a public trust, setting aside time each week for documentaries and newscasts that gave serious consideration to the issues of the day. But as the regulation on broadcasting was loosened and as massive conglomerates swallowed the networks, commercial broadcasters found it harder and harder to serve the public interest. After all, they didn't have just viewers and advertisers to satisfy. They also had to be concerned about their shareholders. Journalism came to be seen as a drain on profit. And so what has happened is that the airwaves have profoundly changed, and we've seen the gutting of news divisions and the tarnishing of what was once proud symbols of a network's prestige. Standards were relaxed, budgets were slashed, and bureaus were closed. The rise of cable and news media further undermined TV journalism. The cable news channels filled their airtime with cheaply produced punditry and pontificating, spending hours upon hours magnifying the tiny, sensationalizing the trivial, and obliterating the line that once distinguished news from opinion. Indeed, cable news is now filtered through a partisan lens. If you feel that you are of more conservative bent, you may spend more time watching Fox News. If you consider yourself to be of a more liberal bent, you may find more time watching MSNBC. And that ideological division also plays out online, where you have the Drudge Report and the Huffington Post occupying very different ends of a polarized blogosphere. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to diminish everything that's happening in commercial media. They're businesses, they're honorable businesses, they have every right to make money for their shareholders. Furthermore, I think there's some wonderful journalism happening on both cable and broadcast and on the internet for sure. If you look at what's going on in newspapers right now, even in a period of declining print circulation, many newspapers are actually seeing an increase in readership as people are reading both online as well as in print. But they are profoundly challenged in trying to figure out a business model that will enable them to sustain their operations with the tremendous decline in print advertising and the disappearance of classified ads. Of course, the newspapers have been particularly hit hard with the mortgage crisis because obviously real estate ads have also been sort of the bread and butter for so many news organizations. I think it's clear that falling standards and the rising partisanship in journalism are threatening the precious link between media and democracy. And I think that they are a part of what's feeding the political gridlock that has immobilized our government. That's why I think PBS is so essential. We are the only public broadcasting service for this country, and I think we are, in the work that we do, trying to fill a very real need that we see as we look across the rest of the landscape. We offer citizens the news and analysis and context that they need to make informed decisions. I think we alone at PBS are upholding television's mantle as a national convener, bringing Americans together, Americans of all different perspectives and points of view, and giving them the kind of serious journalism that they can't find anywhere else. And I think the work that we're doing in this election illustrates my point. Before the primaries, PBS made history when it aired Tavis Smiley's 2 presidential forums. These events mark the first time that candidates from the major parties took questions from a panel comprised totally of journalists of color. This year, if you wanted to watch complete broadcast primetime coverage of the Democratic and Republican conventions, you had exactly one choice, PBS. Everyone else came in and out during the interesting parts. Frankly, I think it's all interesting, and I think it's all profoundly important. And at a time when the documentary has disappeared from network prime time, we've aired countless documentaries on the issues being debated in this election, including a program that I urge you to watch that's on this evening, produced as part of our Frontline series called Heat, which deals with climate change. I think it's also worth noting that of the 4 debates, the 4 presidential and vice presidential debates, 2 of them were moderated from journalists from public broadcasting. Jim Lehrer, who's moderated more debates than any journalist in history, and Gwen Ifill, the only journalist of color and the only woman to serve as a moderator this year. Our peers and public recognize the contributions that PBS makes to journalism. We've received, as Norm so wonderfully articulated in my introduction, thank you, Norm, more news and documentary Emmys than any broadcast or cable channel for the past 5 years. And in the annual Roper poll on public trust, Americans have ranked PBS as the nation's most trusted institution for the past 5 years. More people say they trust PBS than they trust government, the courts, major newspapers, and all broadcast and commercial channels. Now, some may say with government and the courts, the bar is not profoundly high, but we are very proud of the place that we're held in people's hearts. In the same survey, by the way, the public ranked PBS and its news coverage as number 1 in terms of fairness. I think this gives us an enormous responsibility to serve in the marketplace of ideas, and we take it very seriously. We're able to concentrate on quality journalism because of our unique nature. We're not a network, and I think a lot of people are really very confused about what public television is. That's one of the things that we were talking about today in our meeting this morning. PBS is actually a membership organization. We're a membership organization of 355 very independent, and believe me, I run this organization, very independent public television stations across the country. Now, Chicago is home to 2 of our very best, WTTW Channel 11 and WYCC Channel 20. And like all PBS stations, they each develop their work as they see the needs in the community arise. So let me use WTTW actually as my illustration of I think, our unique local national structure. WTTW offers PBS best national programs, everything from Sesame Street and Nova and the NewsHour and Curious George. And it also offers outstanding local programs. Probably the most notable is Chicago Tonight, but also Illinois Lawmakers and Check Please, a program I actually happen to like very much. But its job isn't over when the credits roll at the end of those programs. WTTW also conducts workshops for parents and child care providers, operates a citywide literacy campaign, works closely with the Boy Scouts, and really works very hard at trying to bring the performing arts to citizens from all walks of life through a very unique partnership they forged with the Illinois Arts Council. To be candid, PBS and stations like WTTW were once seen as being sort of behind the times, clinging to what seemed like old-fashioned values of localism and public service at a time when it seemed as if America was more interested in sizzle than steak. Well, it turns out we weren't so behind the times after all. We were actually ahead of the times, and now we're leading America in the future. I think as I look around the rest of the media landscape, I see so few opportunities for anyone telling true local stories, and that's where I think public television is very much unique. And you really should be proud of the station that you have here in this community, and WTTW in particular does an amazing job at really thinking about the needs of Chicago and trying to fill those needs. I think we offer what America wants at a time when people are becoming more civic-minded, community-oriented, and socially conscious. Consider this. Last year, 60.8 million Americans gave 8.1 billion hours of their time to volunteerism. That was a record high, by the way. And here in Chicago, approximately 2 million volunteers dedicated more than 185 million hours of service in 2007. So let's put that into context. That means that the number of volunteers in Chicago was larger than the combined populations of Vermont, North Dakota, and Wyoming. Meanwhile, applications are soaring at organizations like Peace Corps and AmeriCorps and Teach for America. Since 2005, more than 1 million volunteers have traveled to the Gulf Coast to assist in rebuilding after Katrina. In fact, the post-Katrina volunteer levels are actually climbing. 600 volunteers went to the Gulf Coast last year, which was up from 500,000 in the year after the storm hit. Young people in particular are driving the surge in volunteerism. Americans between the ages of 18 and 29, a generation that's often referred to as the millennials, is really leading the charge in terms of becoming involved and getting engaged. In fact, pollster John Zogby has another name for them. He calls them the first globals. As he explains in his new book, The Way Will Be, late teens and 20-somethings see themselves as citizens of the planet, not just of any one nation in particular. They've come of age in an era of the internet, a virtual world without borders. So thanks to Starbucks, First Globals know Ethiopian coffee beans from Colombian beans. Thanks to Whole Foods, they know which beans are organic and which ones are chemically nurtured. And thanks to musicians like Sting and Bono, they're more sensitive to issues like global poverty and AIDS in Africa. The First Globals are the most tolerant, inclusive generation of Americans in history, a group that appreciates diversity, in fact, celebrates it. As Zogby notes, Bill Cosby was their TV dad, Will Smith their TV buddy, Michael Jordan was their athletic hero, and Oprah their confessor. Best of all, the First Globals are more devoted than any age group to finding common ground on tough political issues. Zogby thinks this is because they are very good at listening. He writes that the First Globals are in almost continuous conversation, we all know this, using cell phones, email, text messaging, instant messaging, chat rooms. Much of that conversation is idle chatter, but it's also communication, and it's, as he writes it, a form of conditioning with inevitable results. As PBS's president, I'm heartened to see this new generation becoming engaged and embracing the values and ideals that we have championed for so long. I think the key for all media, both commercial and public alike, is keeping young people and all other citizens in this country engaged after November 11th. And that's why I believe that technology is so critical to the future of our democracy. I know this may sound a little high-minded, but think about all the other ways our life has been transformed by the internet. MySpace and Facebook have changed the way that we meet new people and sometimes reconnect with old friends. If you don't have a Facebook page, I'll explain this to you, and if you do, every person in this room that has one has this experience where you put your stuff up. And then sometimes it's a week later, sometimes it's a day later, sometimes it's months later. You get emails from people that you haven't even thought about for years. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes not. But you don't have to respond to them. You have to find a young person to explain how to navigate through the space. Priceline has changed the way we book our vacations, and iTunes has clearly changed the way that we buy music. Amazon, the way that we buy books, eBay and Craigslist, the way that we clean out our garages. And in this election year, the Internet has also changed the way that candidates campaign for office. Look at the success that some campaigns have had raising money online, using Facebook techniques to appeal to scores of small donors. Clearly, technology has the power to change campaigning. But can it change governing, too? I think that's an interesting question for us all to ponder. Imagine if some presidential cabinet meetings were available as podcasts. I mean, it sounds bizarre, but imagine if citizens could gather in virtual town hall meetings to talk about the important issues of the day. Imagine if Supreme Court sessions could be streamed online in real time. The bottom line is this: if we're going to keep citizens, particularly young people, engaged in the political process after the election, they must continue to feel connected to their representatives. In public television, we're doing our part to keep citizens informed and engaged and preserve the critical role of media and democracy. But there's also a role for, I think, all of us to play as private citizens. Now, as members of this club, you're doing your part in really becoming engaged in this community and focusing on the issues that are really important, and that's important to keep up. But I think it's important for all of us to work together to try to both preserve and promote the values of volunteerism, public service, and citizenship. I think it's up to us to really show this generation as we're moving forward that these are the values that define us, and these are the attributes that we need to hold on to very closely, because I think they're counting on us to work in partnership with them. We're spending so much time now focused leading up to the election, but our most important days are going to come after November 4th. And that's where we together need to stay focused on the issues of great concern, and we can't let them down. And I know in looking around this room, this community is tremendously well served by the people here and your colleagues across the city who are determined to keep those issues front and center. And I want you to know that both at PBS as well as our colleagues at WTTW, we are going to double our efforts to make sure that we serve you as well, to do all that we can to serve as both a convener and a megaphone for the important issues of the time. You have my word for it. So thank you very much for including me today. And now here's the man with the cards.
I just want to say I'm so pleased to have you out speaking before the City Club today. I'm an avid watcher of PBS. It's the first channel I go to look for the programming because it's always something interesting. And it's the program I most refer my friends and relatives to. I mean, I would watch something on PBS. I don't know if any of you guys do this. You call around to your friends and relatives and say, turn it on, turn it on. PBS has this special on. You guys do that? I do that all the time. Well, anyway, I think it's just a wonderful programming. I like Pete Rose and Nova and Bill Moore's Journal, etc. Joyce Saxon from the City Club Board says, do you think that Internet access is dooming print and to some extent TV and radio as we know it?
No, I don't think it's dooming it, but I think it's certainly changing it. Again, I spend a lot of time as I travel around the country, and believe me, in the 2.5 years, we have 355 stations, and there's one of me. The math does not work. So I spend a lot of time on the on airplanes, in the air, and really meeting with community organizations across the country. And I spend a lot of time in newsrooms, meeting with editorial boards and talking to them about partnerships that we can forge between public broadcasting and news organizations. And they are seeing, as I said, actually in many communities, an increase, a fairly dramatic increase in the readership of their newspapers because of the Internet. And I think it makes it easier for people to stay connected and to drill down and look at material. I think in terms of radio and television, it's not dooming us, but it's forcing us to think a little differently about the work that we're doing. We're in the midst right now of a fairly major effort to try to help stations across the country put more video online. Because most people now, if they miss something, expect that the next day they're going to be able to find it somewhere. And so we want to help them. So if you can't be home tonight to watch Frontline, we want you to know that if you go to WTTW's site, I think tomorrow, but certainly within the week, you should be able to pull down Frontline. You can see all of the last 3 seasons of Frontline available online. So go to WTTW.org. They've got great stuff there anyway. But I think that is certainly going to change how we think about, because just think about it. The way that broadcast television has been organized for these many years is you put all this effort behind something, you schedule it very carefully at a time when you think people will watch, because we're public television, so we don't have a lot of advertising money. So we try to get the word out as best we can, and then we cross our fingers. And then hope. And, you know, in sort of public television terms, we'd get maybe a 3 rating, and we'd feel pretty good. You know, 3 rating is pretty good. And actually, by commercial standards, that's not so far off from commercial broadcasters. Well, what does the 3 rating mean? It means that 97% of the people that could be watching television missed that show, many of whom would love to see that information. And so being able to broadcast programs for people that want to sit in their living room and have a schedule delivered to them is something that we want to continue to do. But we also want to make sure that if you go to your laptop and log on to WTTW.org, you can pull down that Frontline episode and watch it as well. And then as computers and television come together, eventually you'll be able to go online to WTTW.org. Let's see how many times I can say that in the next 5 minutes. Pull up the episode and actually watch it on your big television in the living room with the rest of your family. So I think it just changes the way we think about things.
That's wonderful. I think you're going to enjoy this question, Paula.
I hope so.
This is from Marty McLaughlin. He says, with such a great brand with which to be associated, what can we do to bolster corporations' underwriting of PBS? I'm sorry. PSD. Something there. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me. Dan, do you want to give the address of where to mail the checks to the station? Anyway, I think that there are a couple things. One is I think it is important, and as I'm very sympathetic to anyone that has the responsibility of trying to make wise decisions for corporate underwriting, because this is a confusing media landscape. There are lots of options now of where you could place your money. And I think the thing that most people don't realize is that the audiences for public television are really significant. Just in broadcast alone, we have a larger audience than CNN. Now, most people are surprised about that. More people watch the NewsHour than watch CNN. It's true. So if you're an advertiser and you're trying to reach people that really make a difference in communities, what we refer to as, as really decision makers. And I don't mean just people that have large net assets. I'm also talking about community leaders, teachers, clergy. These are the people that watch public television in a significantly larger percentage than anyone else. So people that are connected, engaged, and I would argue for most products would probably be a good market. Public television is a good place to come. The other thing that you need to know that I would say to anyone that was thinking about making a media buy that would involve public broadcasting is that our website is the most heavily trafficked website of any broadcaster. And that has consistently been during the summer. Now, occasionally ABC will pop up because American Idol, all their numbers get swept into their numbers, so they do spike. But on a consistent basis, we have a very significant audience. And if we're not 1, we're number 2 or number 3 in terms of the number of people that are coming onto the site. And so to be able to be associated with something that has a lot of traffic through those broadcast as well as online, as well as a brand that I think recognizes and represents, as the Roper poll indicates, not just trust, but what does that really mean? It represents integrity. It represents aspiring to really use the power of media, not just to sell, but also to educate and illuminate and inspire. And I think it's a very powerful association with public broadcasting. So I'm using all my best arguments. So if there's anyone that has little advertising money to spend, you're coming into the 4th quarter of the year, go see Dan Souls sitting right there, and he'll put you in touch with the corporate underwriting people at WTTW.
I knew you would like that one.
I do. Give me another good one.
Here's another good one.
I hope you sorted through those well.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
This is Murray Fields.
From WTTW.
There you go.
It's a setup.
How will the challenging economic times affect PBS?
Yep.
The news hour with Jim Lair has already made significant staff and budget cuts. What's the future to look like?
Actually, this is something that Norm and I were talking about this morning, really thinking about all of the nonprofits and the challenges that we're going to face, both in terms of for those of us that receive some federal money. We get 15% of our overall funding to public broadcasting comes from the federal government. That's 1.5, by the way, not 50, 15. And we then leverage it with individual philanthropy and foundation support, and it's a great honor to be in the same room with Mr. Benton, who has made a big impact on public broadcasting for many years. And, in fact, the largest percentage of money that comes into public broadcasting is contributions from viewers like you. Thank you. And so we're worried very much about making sure that as we move forward during what clearly are going to be challenging economic times that will be with us for some time, that we signal value. Now, I just spoke a couple weeks ago to a group of fundraisers for public television stations around the country, and if you look at some of the trends, now I do think that we're in sort of uncharted territory right now, but if you look at the trends over the last 20, 25 years, you'll be struck by one thing, which is even during recessionary periods, philanthropic contributions do continue to rise. People do continue to make contributions to the organizations they believe in and trust. And so I am hopeful that as we work closely with our stations around the country, that we will not only work harder at doing good work, but we'll work harder at making sure that we're letting you know, as you consider your philanthropic contributions, that we make good use of your dollars. It is true the NewsHour has had a very challenged time. They lost a significant corporate underwriter. If you look at the funding for the NewsHour, and go home tonight and do this, most of the funding for the NewsHour is actually now foundation support, which has been a pivotal change. They have tightened up, and they have cut back. I think that the NewsHour is a program that deserves corporate support, and we're working very closely with them to try to bring resources in. So if you have any ideas for me, I'm sitting at the front here. But I think we also, as I've traveled around and talked to foundation leaders around the country, I think there's a great recognition that public television and public radio do play a unique role in news and journalism, and particularly in international news. And I think this is a time we need to increase our coverage of such issues, not decrease. And that's what we're determined to do.
Thank you. I just have a couple more. This is from Michael Gonzalez. WTTW 11 Board of Trustees, another plan. Can you please comment on positive outcomes and reactions from the Latino community to Ken Burns' film, The War?
Yes. Just to give you a quick background before I answer the question for anyone that doesn't understand the question, there was a lot of concern when Ken produced the war documentary last year, broadcast last September, which was a multi-part series on World War II, that he had overlooked the contributions of Latino soldiers. He worked very hard at adding some material to the film, which I think made it an even more compelling story. But I think the experience of it really has been actually a great gift to public broadcasting, which sounds like an odd thing to say. But it's accomplished a couple things. One is we've developed relationships with a number of people within the Latino community, with lots of different organizations. Relationships, many of which we had, but certainly going through this experience have deepened tremendously. We also have put together at PBS a deeper project and initiative dealing with diversity. As you look, and certainly as I travel around the country, it is very clear to me that if we are to serve America, we need to make sure that public television reflects its great diversity. And so we are looking at how we can do a better job. I think that our work in public television has been solid over the years, but we can do better. And so what we have started is actually a sort of a multi-platform approach. One is looking at leadership, and that's both on the board side as well as on the staff side. We've actually started a leadership development program to try to identify future public television general managers, because I think that if you are serious about doing something to make a change in an organization, then you have to look at the very top as well as across the organization. And so that program actually is in partnership with Northwestern here. And this is now we have the third class, actually the second full class. The first year we did it as sort of a test. And then we are looking very hard as we go through our greenlighting process, as we look at the programs that we bring into our schedule for broadcast. And we also are spending a lot of time looking at the work we're doing online, because that is a space where we are attracting a lot of new people to public broadcasting and new voices to public broadcasting, particularly young people. And in fact, I started to say viewership. It's not really viewership. It's the users of our online service actually tend to skew actually a little younger, as you would expect, but much more diverse than our broadcast audience. And we're looking to build on that and try to increase the ways that we are bringing people into public broadcasting, because that makes our work the richer for everyone.
Last question. This comes from Judith Reese.
Who's not with WTTW.
She's now with TTW. Why is the News Hour with Jim Leonard not repeated on WTTW? This is a great question. And not run at all on Wise TV?
Well, I'm not. In terms of I can answer both questions together, which is every public television station, as I mentioned during my speech, is independent. And so I am actually not running a network. I am running the membership organization for all the stations. And so each station decides at the end of the day what it's going to put in its broadcast schedule. And for those that decide they don't want to run the News Hour, that's their determination. WTTW, I know, has a deep commitment to local news as well as national, and so I won't answer why they're not running a second repeat of the News Hour. Most stations actually only run it once, but that's the determination of each and every station. And if it's something that you'd like to see, I don't know where you are, Judith, but if it's something you'd like to see, then you should contact WTTW and let them know. The thing that's different about public television than most other broadcasters, and I painfully knew this when I was in New York, because occasionally we do stupid things. You know, my stupid thing was we used to run a second play of Charlie Rose in the afternoons during the week, and I stupidly thought, well, I sort of wanted that time for a new program, and I took Charlie off the air. And thousands of phone calls later of people that called me every name they could think of, most of which started with stupid, I saw the error of my ways and I put Charlie Rose back on in the afternoon. I mean, we do a lot of the work that we do because we listen to people in the community, because we are public and we do pay attention. And if you feel that there are services that you are hoping that we should be providing, then you should let them know, because they do listen. It doesn't mean that they listen, that they answer positively to every call they get, because obviously there are lots of people with different perspectives and points of view. And for every person that would love to see the News Hour on multiple times, there are others that would love to see other programs that I'm sure they're juggling in the schedule. But the News Hour is actually an interesting example, because you can, in some communities, you can listen to the News Hour on the radio. It sounds pretty good on the radio, actually. The News Hour is consistently in the top 100 of all iTunes downloads on a daily basis. So you can download onto your iPod if you aren't getting the News Hour at exactly the time that you want it. And you can go online and listen to pieces of News Hour online. So go to WTTW.org and click into the NewsHour, and that's another option of how to get the service. I think finally, a number of cable services are starting to offer on demand, and the NewsHour is a program that, as we consider our work moving forward, is obviously the kind of program that you would love to see on a demand service, so that any time you miss the NewsHour, even if you miss it by 10 minutes, you can come in and click onto it, and that to me also seems like a good service that WTTW could provide once that's available.
As a token of our appreciation, the City Club offers you a mug.
Oh, why, thank you.
Enjoy. You're also a one-year membership.
Oh, that's even better.
Keep coming back. And a history, just in case you get a little sleepless nights, you can catch up on what's going on in the city of Chicago. Thank you very much, Paula. Appreciate it. For those who have not joined, please consider joining City Club Chicago. It's a wonderful forum for public policy issues. Please come back.